Well, hello there. Welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, thanks for joining in. You're just in time for the bedtime stories. So tonight's book is called Tales from the Perilous Realm. It's actually by J.R.R. Tolkien. And this is a continuation from the first video of this reading. So I am excited to find out about Rover the dog, see what happens to him. So if you are too, then let's listen in. Okay, let's begin. The two older boys used to get up when it was fine and run along the sands before their breakfast. That morning, when they woke and pulled up the blind, they saw the sun jumping out of the sea, all fiery red, with clouds above his head, as if he had had a cold bath and was drying himself with towels. They were soon up and dressed, and off they went down the cliff and onto the shore for a walk, and Rover went with them. Just as little boy 2, to whom Rover belonged, was leaving the bedroom, he saw Rover sitting on the chest of drawers where he had put him while he was dressing. "He is begging to go out," he said, and put him in his trouser pocket. But Rover was not begging to go out, and certainly not in a trouser pocket. He wanted to rest and get ready for the night again, for he thought that this time he might find a way out and escape, and wander away and away until he came back to his home and his garden and his yellow ball on the lawn. He had a sort of idea that if once he could get back to the lawn, it might come all right. The enchantment might break, or he might wake up and find it had all been a dream. So, as the little boys scrambled down the cliff path and galloped along the sands, he tried to bark and struggle and wriggle in the pocket. Try how he would, he could only move a very little, even though he was hidden and no one could see him. Still he did what he could, and luck helped him. There was a handkerchief in the pocket, all crumpled and bundled up, so that Rover was not very deep down, and what with his efforts and the galloping of his master, before long he had managed to poke out his nose and have a sniff round. Very surprised he was too, at what he smelt and what he saw. He had never either seen or smelt the sea before, and the country village where he had been born was miles and miles from sound or snuff of it. Suddenly, as he was leaning out, a great big bird, all white and grey, went sweeping by just over the heads of the boys, making a noise like a great cat on wings. Rover was so startled that he fell right out of the pocket onto the soft sand, and no one heard him. The great bird flew on and away, never noticing his tiny barks, and the little boys walked on and on along the sands, and never thought about him at all. At first, Rover was very pleased with himself. I've run away," he barked, toy barking that only other toys could have heard, and there were none to listen. Then he rolled over and lay in the clean, dry sand that was still cool from lying out all night under the stars. But when the little boys went by on their way home and never noticed him, and he was left all alone on the empty shore. He was not quite so pleased. The shore was deserted, except by the gulls. Beside the marks of their claws on the sand, the only other footprints to be seen were the tracks of the little boy's feet. That morning they had gone for their walk on a very lonely part of the beach that they seldom visited. Indeed, it was not often that anyone went there, for though the sand was clean and yellow, and the shingle white, and the sea blue with silver foam, in a little cove under the grey cliffs, there was a queer feeling there, except just at early morning when the sun was new. People said that strange things came there, sometimes even in the afternoon, and by the evening the place was full of mermen and mermaidens, not to speak of the smaller sea goblins that rode their small sea horses with bridles of green weed right up to the cliffs, and left them lying in the foam at the edge of the water. Now the reason of all this queerness was simple. The oldest of all the sand sorcerers lived in that cove, Samathists, as the sea people called them in their splashing language. Samathos, Samathids, was this one's name, or so he said, and a great fuss he made about the proper pronunciation. But he was a wise old thing, and all sorts of strange folk came to see him, for he was an excellent magician, and very kindly to the right people into the bargain, if a bit crusty on the surface. The merfolk used to laugh over his jokes for weeks after one of his midnight parties. But it was not easy to find him in the daytime. He liked to lie buried in the warm sand when the sun was shining, so that not more than the tip of one of his long ears stuck out. And even if both of his ears were showing, most people like you and me would have taken them for bits of stick. It is possible that old Samathos knew all about Rover. He certainly knew the old wizard who had enchanted him, for magicians and wizards are few and far between, and they know one another very well and keep an eye on one another's doings too, not always being the best of friends in private life. At any rate, there was Rover lying in the soft sand and beginning to feel very lonely and rather queer. And there was Samathos, though Rover did not see him, peeping at him out of a pile of sand that the mermaids had made for him the night before. But the sand sorcerer said nothing, and Rover said nothing, and breakfast time went by, and the sun got high and hot. Rover looked at the sea, which sounded cool, and then he got a horrible fright. At first he thought that the sand must have got into his eyes, but soon he saw that there could be no mistake. The sea was moving nearer and nearer, and swallowing up more and more sand, and the waves were getting bigger and bigger, and more foamy all the time. The was coming in, and Rover was lying just below the high water mark. But he did not know anything about that. He grew more and more terrified as he watched, and thought of the splashing waves coming right up to the cliffs and washing him away into the foaming sea, far worse than any soapy bathing tub, still miserably begging. That is indeed what might have happened to him, but it did not. I dare say Samathos had something to do with it. At any rate, I imagine that the wizard's spell was not so strong in that queer cove, so close to the residence of another magician. Certainly, when the sea had come very near, and Rover was nearly bursting with fright as he struggled to roll a bit further up the beach, he suddenly found he could move. His size was not changed, but he was no longer a toy. He could move quickly and properly with all his legs, daytime though it still was. He did not beg any more, and he could run over the sands where they were harder, and he could bark, not toy barks, but real sharp little fairy dog barks, equal to his fairy dog size. He was so delighted, and he barked so loud, that if you had been there, you would have heard him then, clear and far away like the echo of a sheepdog coming down the wind of the hills. And then the sand sorcerer suddenly stuck his head out of the sand. He certainly was ugly, and about as big as a very large dog. But to Rover, in his enchanted size, he looked hideous and monstrous. Rover sat down and stopped barking at once. "What are you making such a noise about, little dog?" said Samathes. "This is my time for sleep." As a matter of fact, all times were times for him to go to sleep, unless something was going on which amused him, such as a dance of the mermaids in the cove at his invitation. In that case, he got out of the sand and sat on a rock to see the fun. Mermaids may be very graceful in the water, but when they tried to dance on their tails on the shore, Samathos thought them comical. "This is my time for sleep," he said again, when Rover did not answer. Still, Rover said nothing, and only wagged his tail apologetically. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "I am Samathes, the chief of all the Samathis." He said this several times, very proudly, pronouncing every letter, and with every P he blew a cloud of sand down his nose. Rover was nearly buried in it, and he sat there looking so frightened and so unhappy that the sand sorcerer took pity on him. In fact, he suddenly stopped looking fierce and burst out laughing. "You are a funny little dog. Indeed, I don't remember ever having seen another little dog that was quite such a little dog. And then he laughed again, and after that he suddenly looked solemn. "Have you been having any quarrels with wizards lately?" he asked, almost in a whisper, and he shut one eye, and he looked so friendly and so knowing out of the other one that Rover told him all about it. It was probably quite unnecessary, for Samathos, as I told you, probably knew about it beforehand. Still, Rover felt all the better for talking to someone who appeared to understand and had more sense than mere toys. Alright, so that was Rover. He finally could move. That was cool. So I'm glad for Rover. And yeah, it's bedtime now. If you do enjoy that reading, do give it a like and do share with someone who you think might enjoy this. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. You know, you're not gonna miss this the next reading. I'm gonna continue this story. I'm gonna continue reading this in another video. Maybe tomorrow, maybe not, maybe in the future videos, but yeah, I will do it. So until then, I wish you have a great evening, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.